Going,
Hello, family. Welcome to the Resurgence of the African Mind Book Club, where we meet every Sunday from 7 p.m. until 8 p.m. to discuss our readings. And as you know, our reading for this session is The Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson. Last week we read chapter 1. Chapter 1 is What is Power? Briefly, we're going to discuss what is power, certain points where we talked about forces, we talked about coercion, we talked about competent and legitimate authority. We also talked about manipulation and the impacts that those have on the Black community. Anybody want to add anything about chapter 1? Because if not, we can move on to chapter 2 because it's thick.
Yeah, chapter 2 is thick. But no, that was beautifully said, sis. Last week, like you said, we defined what is power, the different types of power. And this week we're going to go into chapter 2, which discusses the basis of power. Sister Alima, in your opinion, what do you think the gist, like, what did you get out of this chapter when you read it? I mean, we're going to, go through it and discuss it bit by bit, but overall, what did you kind of get out of the chapter?
This chapter for me was very, very informative. And it basically was telling us how organizations and networks and institutions, the way that they really operate and the main reason that they were created and how they help to maintain power. And I didn't even realize that you could break down organization and institutions so much. I mean, this chapter was really, really in depth. It really was.
Absolutely. And, absolutely, sis. And I totally agree with you that was really the gist of, that was the gist of the chapter. And when I walked away from chapter 2, I felt like that the greatest weapon against us as a people is disorganization. I know that throughout the chapter, Dr. Amos Wilson emphasized that a group of people who may have less human and material resources than you can dominate and exploit you if they're more organized than you are. That's right. And so he emphasized that throughout the chapter. And, anyway, so I don't even want to get into the different parts that I liked and that, and so we're going to go through it, starting with page 27, sis. He talks about the basis of power. The basis of power, and he defined the basis of power as our resources. I'm looking at chapter 2, page 27, where he says, basis of power, resources may include physical safety, health and well-being, wealth and material possessions, jobs and a means to a livelihood, knowledge and social skills, social recognition, status and prestige, love, affection, social acceptability, a satisfactory image and self-respect. So those are the power, he says power bases are really your resources. And he defined those resources on page 27. Did you want to add anything to that, sis, or you want to move right along?
Nope, we can move right on along.
Okay, so now we know that the basis of that power bases are resources, and we just named those. So on page 28, was there something in particular that stood out to you?
Page,
no, go ahead.
Page 28, he begins to talk about social power. Social power is based or rests on social desires and needs. Toffler, 1990, asserts forthrightly that because people have needs and desires, those who can fulfill them hold potential power. Social power is exercised by supplying or withholding the desired or needed items and experiences. So that says to me that basically power lies within the people who can provide your resources. Once again, we're back to talking about resources, and that in essence is social power.
Absolutely, sis. And then he goes on to talk, he continues to talk about resources, and he says that resources not only include the aforementioned on page 27, but he said it also includes property, organization, race consciousness, and ideologies. Those are also considered power resources. All right. So he says right here on page 28, These power resources include property, organization, race conscious, and ideology. We do not include state politics. And this was very powerful to me, sis, because a lot of us have these conversations about whether we should vote or not vote, whether Black people should participate in the political process. And you hear some folks say, well, no, you know, I don't go out there and vote, you know, on the federal level, but I do vote on the state level because, you know, it directly affects me or directly impacts me.
Right.
So they do state voting or local voting. But this is what Dr. Amos Wilson says about participating in even state politics. He said, we do not include state politics in our discussion at this juncture because in the context of contemporary African-American social, political, and economic culture and the more basic issues it must resolve, state politics is of secondary importance to the Black community. Black politics and activism without Black ownership of and control over primary forms and bases of power such as property, wealth, organization, etc., is the recipe for Black political and non-political powerlessness. So we think that, Brother T, nice to join. How you doing, brother?
Hey, sister.
We're going to put everything on. Everyone's going to be on mute while we're, you know, until we get to it. Okay, cool. All right. So this to me, Sister Alima, I remember telling my mom and having conversations with my family about whether or not to vote. And we're voting or we're participating in these electoral processes, but we're voting without power. There's no power in our vote. You know, so I'm not going to say that it's pointless, but we still end up powerless because when we're voting for these candidates, it's not like we're putting people in those positions. We're not putting people in positions of power that can empower us. We have no control over that. And that's exactly what I thought about when I read this page, when I read this paragraph on page 28. And even he goes on to say that a host of other social and political ills have all attended increases in the number of Black people elected and appointed officials. So he's saying even though we have Black appointed officials, our social and political ills have still increased even as those candidates or the number of candidates increased because we have no power, sis.
Exactly.
There's no power. We have no power. So did anyone else want to add something to, is it something else that stuck out on you on page 28? Did anyone want to add
That
anything?
was everything I had highlighted that you mentioned.
You know, we always on the same page, sis.
Exactly.
Always. Brother T, is there anything you wanted to add? Brother Knowledge Born, Sister Camille, anything on page 28 that stuck out to you? All right, moving on. Oh, there you go. Brother T.
Right now, so I just jumped on. I'm gonna listen to a little bit more before I add in. You're looking at page 28, talking about political power, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, other than to echo what you said, Sister Dr. Maat, basically, we definitely need to understand that we do have to create a Black politics in the form, but we have to have a very viable Black agenda. And that's one thing we have not gained in our communities. So before we move forward, before we just hand over our vote to anyone, we have to make sure that the politician, the appointed brother or sister, have our best interest in mind.
Absolutely.
And that's putting money in our pockets. That's giving us an opportunity to compete and to receive government programs, us to buy and utilize land. So we have a lot of things that we have to organize before we get to that point to be important movers and shakers in that political arena.
Absolutely. So let me ask the panel a question. Do you think, okay, knowing that when we cast our vote during the federal and state elections, knowing that when we cast our vote, we still don't have any power, should we continue to participate in the political process? I mean, so these aren't candidates that you chose, right? These are candidates that someone puts in front of you and say, hey, choose. And I used to hate the whole saying of you have to choose the lesser of the two evils. I hate it. And I remember at 18, asking my mother, I said, why do I have to choose the lesser of two evils? You know what I mean? But knowing this, should we still continue to vote? Because a lot of people say, well, someone died for you to vote. Someone died for you. Do you think that we should still participate in the voting process, even though we know that our votes even though we know that there's no power behind our votes?
I like to say something about that. I think we're being played. If our vote has no power, it's basically being used against us. If we vote for people, we put people in office or the lesser of two evils that do nothing for our community, what's the purpose? Other than to aid white supremacy. So I think unless we can put a candidate in that is going to do something for our community, until we can do that, I think it's useless. I used to feel that you need to vote because people died and blah blah blah, but I think it's just digging us in a worse hole.
I would have to say that people need to recognize that our ancestors were fighting to be treated equally. They were fighting to be treated as human beings. So that had to do with voting. That had to do with riding their transportation. That had to do with working. That had to do with being able to come in and eat a certain place, being able to use the bathroom. So they were fighting to be treated as human beings, as equals. They weren't putting their lives on the line to vote. They were putting their lives on the line for equality, just to be clear. And secondly, I wouldn't say that—
I agree.
I wouldn't say that us voting is powerless or a waste of time. I would say that since we're talking about organization, we would need to organize to find the most viable candidates to put in a position that are conscious enough to understand the position of African people here in America and want to help. So if we, like people always talk about nationality and building a new government, and if we're talking about politics, then you have to establish your own political system that looks like you, that's going to do the work for you. So until we get that in place, then yes, I would say voting is powerless.
I had a question for the panel. My question is regarding voting. The issue of voting, if we do not participate as a people in the process of voting, could it threaten us as a people? Could people get a hold to key positions of power in our communities if we don't participate in the process of voting? Could they come into power and threaten us as a people if we don't participate in voting?
Well, people already have positions, key positions of power. They don't do anything for us.
Absolutely. But the thing is, if we are in an all-black city and at a mayor level, city council, education, if we as a people don't participate at all in voting and we allow white people to take these key positions, could that threaten us as a people?
I would say yes and no, because there's higher forces at work that whether we were to vote or not, even if we did vote like we did with Obama and seemingly got someone in office who seemed to represent us, we still didn't benefit, and actually to our detriment in a lot of ways. So I would say no.
I don't think we asked Obama for anything in particular.
But I think the biggest difference is with whites or other races. Give me a second, Zaire. With whites or other races, they have lobbying power. See, it's not about the votes per se. It's about the lobbying power. It's about the money, because lobbying equals money. And so what they do is they take that money and they spread it across where it needs to go to people who are actually going to and have the power to put in work for them, that can put in work for them. We don't lobby for anyone. We didn't lobby for Obama. You know why homosexuals got so much from Obama? They put millions in that man's pocket. Millions. That's why. That's why they were able to get their little agenda put across. It's not because he was gay, because it's about the money, and politics is about money, and money is power.
You have his attention when you give him money, most definitely. But we still have to look at everything in politics and keep a close eye on everything that's happening. So until we able to lobby, until we're able to build big business, that generates the money that the politicians and the government is going to respect, we still have to vote that conscious vote for putting someone in office that can help benefit us, that follows an agenda. We have to start creating an agenda, local and on the federal government level, in order to make moves. I would say tell everyone to look at affirmative action. How many people on this panel have benefited from some form of affirmative action? Some people who receive financial gains from going to school by receiving a fund. Most African American families don't have the money to pay for a $40,000, $50,000, $80,000 education. These are things that people fought for. They had an agenda to include us in education. And they also have we need to build an agenda to include ourselves in economic inclusion as well. So we do need to still pay attention to politics.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would agree there. And I don't think just because you don't participate, you should still keep an eye on what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know everything they're doing, and I don't vote at all.
Absolutely. Right. And I haven't voted in some years. So, but like you said, you still have to keep a watchful eye on what's going on.
Right.
Absolutely.
You want to move on, sis?
Yes. I'm looking at page 29. And what I have highlighted on this page is the quote by Thomas Dye, which states, "Power is never equally distributed. There is no power where power is equal. For power to be exercised, the power holder must control base values. Inequality of power in social systems is correlated with inequality of the distribution of power resources within them." So then he goes on to say, I have another highlighted below that, "Inequality of power between individuals and groups must evolve from their unequal share of property, wealth, organization, social prestige, social legitimacy, number of adherents, various kinds of knowledgeability and leadership skills, technological skills, control of jobs, control of information, ability to manipulate the symbolic environment, and ability to apply force and violence." So he's saying here that, power is not distributed equally. In a social system, there's always the power holder, and I would guess you would say the others will be subordinate. So you have a power holder and a subordinate, and how whoever controls the resources has the power. So that's what I got out of page 29. Right. Whoever controls the resources has the power. And so we can look at that. We can relate that, sis, to Africa, even South Africa.
Yes.
When you look at the amount of resources that Africans have, like on the continent, the amount of resources that are on that continent, but they don't control it. You have a population of Europeans, Europeans who control the resources, so therefore they have the power. So, it may be a predominantly Black country or predominantly African country, but they don't control their own resources. And the people who do control the resources have the power. And so, that's what I thought about when I read this page. Any thoughts, brothers and sisters, on page 29? Any other thoughts you would like to share?
No, I agree completely.
All righty. Page 30, sis.
I had here the second paragraph. "Economic power is the power to decide what will be produced, how much it will cost, how many people will be employed, what their wages will be, what price of goods and services will be, what profits will be made, how these profits will be distributed, and how fast the economy will grow." So of course we know right now we actually have a lot of economic power, spending power, but we'll get to that later. I also had right up under, "In capitalistic America, the foundation of economic power is private property, whose ownership not only refers to real estate, but also to the ownership of the means of production, of accumulated capital, factories, machinery, etc. Wealth, surplus production, or surplus material goods as belonging to private individuals or groups, instead of the people or nation as a whole. Racial and class domination fundamentally involves the unequal interaction between the owners of property and wealth, and the propertyless and poor, the greater power residing in the hands of the first group. And this rang with me so much because my mom always used to say that people, that in America, if you don't own anything, you're a nobody. And, you know, I didn't really understand that until I got older and understood what actually ownership really means. And it really means a lot. And you do hold a lot of power when you actually own something. And Black people here in America, we don't own most of the stuff that we have. We don't own a lot of our cars. We don't own our homes. We don't own our land, you know, and which continually puts us at the bottom because we don't own our resources. We're kind of just renting and borrowing, you know, from everyone else.
Right. Yeah, and you also lose the ability to pass, you know, wealth on.
Yes.
When you don't own anything. That's also how that's how they're able to, you know, maintain wealth, because they keep passing it on to generation. If you don't own anything, you can't do that.
Exactly, Queen.
So our children are always starting at zero.
That's right. Brother?
Absolutely. And I actually, and like you said, there's power in ownership, and you're right. We function more like renters. Like you said, Sister Alima, we function more like renters than owners. I'm sharing something personal, even within my family. I remember having a talk with one of my family members about a house that they own. And they said, you know, well, I want to sell it. And I said, well, look, you know, the house will be paid off, you know, within 6 years. 6 years. Well, you know, the taxes is, you know, it's kind of getting to me. I said, you know, let's tough it out. And even if I have to put up some money, you know, to make you keep this house, you know, I'll help you keep this house, you know, I will, because I understand that in 6 years, you're going to have a paid off house that you can pass down, a paid off house that if you want to start collecting residual income, let's say you get a renter in there and you charge the renter $1,000 a month.
Right.
You can forever charge this person $1,000 a month. So that's $12,000 a year, extra money that you have coming in your pockets. You know, but we need to start thinking like that as a people and stop being so quick to sell. As soon as we get something, we want to sell. I remember my brother T came over here to visit me a few days ago, and we were talking about gold, and he was showing me how the value of gold. And I remember years ago when there used to be signs plastered around in the inner city, we'll buy your gold. Black people ran to these places to hand over their gold, and the foreigners were just buying up gold, right? So quick to sell instead of keeping it and allowing things to appreciate. It's kind of like we don't have any patience, Sister Alima. It's like an instantaneous gratification. We want it now. We want that now, instead of saying, well, let me stay and let me hold on to this and wait for it to appreciate value.
Well, we don't understand the system of economics, and we don't understand how the world is run, you know, off of resources, and those things are, you know, have been kept from us, you know, because we weren't allowed to participate in it.
That's right. We're gonna get to that.
I agree. And I remember speaking to my father a few months ago, and he was telling me how there used to be an economic class in public schools, in the public school system. And then he said they took it out maybe 40 or 50 years ago. He said they just kind of snatched it out. But he said he remembered when he was matriculating, and he was born in 47. But he was saying he remembered when he was a young guy, like matriculating through the system, they had classes on economics. And there are no more classes. Our children graduate out of high school and college and never have taken a class about economics. So they don't even understand how an economy runs, how to maneuver within, you know, an economy. They have no idea. So I think you're 100% correct, Sister Camille. What'd you say, Brother T?
I said that was just too many tools to give us.
That's right.
If you think about the dynamics in Baltimore, where we live, remember there was East Side and West Side Skill Center. And when East Side and West Side Skill Center stopped, the pipeline was straight from high school to prison. Because it used to be, once we finished high school, if we couldn't afford to go to college, we at least had West Side Skill Center to learn a trade. And with that trade, you can start a business. And then you start seeing the influx of all these trade schools popping up. Test College, when you're coming down to ITT Tech, these replace Westside Skill Center in our communities. But there used to be a funnel for our kids to go and learn a trade that was viable, and for them to learn, do a business, and make good money. So when you talk about in this chapter, when it talks about us being renters and basically not owners, we've been wiped out every step of the way of ownership in this country, from slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and to the civil rights movement. So when your father mentioned 47 years ago, think about when integration started. So it was a plan to keep us jobless and without skills. And it became unpopular for our households to even want to know a trade. So
right.
It was the dynamics of this thing happening. And we had to be aware of that to make that change back, to make sure that our young boys understand about automation, because that's the new level, to understand about automation. Everything's been automated, so we have to get them ready for this.
Indeed,
right. Having a trade, you can always make money.
Mm-hmm.
You have a trade. That was one of the reasons they took it out, you know, so that they can bring in foreigners to do those jobs for cheaper, and lock us out of them, as well as taking away the civics. You know, that's why we also have a political,
right,
because we don't know anything about civics.
And just to touch bases on what Dr. Maat was mentioning earlier about, I'm sorry, when she was reading page 30 about economic power, how it looks. Just remember, like I said before, we were locked out of even getting land for so long.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that, brother.
Yeah, I'm about to say, you don't.
We gotta keep going, because we're gonna start touching on points that we're gonna get.
Gotcha.
Shortly.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to drive home this point, because we mentioned property and goods and services as economic resources, or even just power resources. No, I'm sorry. When we talked about ownership, as it relates to like property. But I want to drive home on page 30. In the probably like the third or fourth paragraph. He says that private ownership of property refers to far more than ownership of concrete things like land, houses, factories, personal items, production tools, machinery, and the like. He said private property also refers to rights and claims in two things to certain privileges relative to things, activities. All right. So private property or private ownership of property is not limited to just land, houses, and like he said, concrete things, tangible things. It may be rights or interests that may be considered private ownership. Like even think about the patent office. People patent their ideas. That's considered property, that's considered private ownership of property. Just your idea,
That's right.
And so I just want to drive home that, property is not always land or houses or concrete or tangible things.
That's right. Because right at the top of 31, it says ultimately property is what the state, as adjudicated by its legislative bodies and courts, says it is. So pretty much whatever they claim to be property.
Right, whatever they want it to be.
That's what it is, right? I thought that was funny. It says the central function of the modern state is the protection and regulation.
She was reading, Sister Camille. Go ahead, Sister Alima. It said, you at the top?
Sister Camille, hold on, Queen. Right here at the top, the first paragraph, family. The central function of the modern state is the protection and regulation of the private property system, to defend the owners of property and wealth from the propertyless and poor. And that rang with me because if you think about a lot of the laws in the states, especially when it comes to property, you pretty much have the right to kill a person dead if they obscure your property. In North Carolina, if someone tries to steal your car, if it is of a certain value, I could kill you for you trying to steal my car, depending on the value of my car if I own it. And it can be the same thing for your home. Someone comes into your home. you have the right to kill that person in certain states, but it is dependent on property ownership based on certain statutes. So I thought that was interesting. But it says that the ownership of property demarcates the borderline between inclusion and exclusion. So, you know, like if you don't own any property, you're pretty much excluded from a lot of things power-wise that can be accomplished.
Yes, and that's, oh yeah, I'm looking at it right there. So you're on the next paragraph where it says central to social organization of power are the processes of exclusion. Yep. Yep. Let me highlight that too, sis. That was a good one.
Next paragraph under, hence power relations are inextricably reflective of property relations. The dominance and subordinates of classes and races are constituted by the power deriving from the ownership of property, more so from control over key resources and the means of production. The propertyless classes and races, by the fact of their propertylessness, are compelled to bow to the demands of the property as a condition for obtaining their daily bread. Therein is the basis for dominance and subordinates.
I have nothing to add, sis. I just highlighted everything you just read, and I did not have that highlighted. Page 31, I'm sorry, 32. Moving on to page 32.
Sister Camille, anything you want to highlight here? Anything you want to touch on, page 32?
Yes. The first paragraph where it says, Africans were brought to the Americas as the private property of Europeans. Production of their labor was expropriated and accumulated both during and after their enslavement. The theft of Indian lands are the fundamental source of European, American, African, American property power relations to this very moment. Moreover, white America's long history of 100% racial quotas in favor of whites and its use of racial discrimination as a standard form of cartel power, Cross 1987, has provided whites and some of their non-white immigrant group imitators with the property means of bending the will and shaping the behavior of relatively propertyless, dependent Black Americans. So for me, that, you know, just sums up, you know, everything. A lot of people don't even realize, you know, the theft of our ideas from the time that we were enslaved. You know, a lot of the tools and things that we came up with, you know, Europeans stole and, you know, make money off of up until today. So not only did they steal our bodies, but, you know, our ideas.
Absolutely, and our labor generated so much wealth. You know, how much cotton, you know, that we picked, and I mean, our labor itself, you know, like you said, our labor, our ideas, all of that. I remember my brother T was showing me an article. You remember, Brother T, you had an article that said for every $1 we have, the average white person has, was it 12 or 13?
Right. $13.
Yeah, so for every $1 we have, the average white person has 13. And they had that, like you said, sis, from all of the years, you know, all of the years where we were A, excluded from accumulating wealth, and then B, all of the time that we spent into the labor that we supply, the ideas. So they are ahead of us, you know, they are ahead of us. And so that was powerful. I actually have that highlighted also, sis. And then I also highlighted the second paragraph where he says, the rapid accumulation and applied organization of property and wealth by any means necessary must become top priority goals of the African community if it is to maximally ensure its own future survival and well-being. So we have to accumulate resources and we have to organize if we want to survive. And that's what I got out of this page. And then at the bottom, I highlighted a statement where he says, the principal means by which white men gain wealth and power is through aggressive ruthlessness and race-based organization. So throughout this chapter, Dr. Amos Wilson is, you know, constantly or continually enforcing that, look, you need to get resources and we need to get organized. But moving on to page 33.
All right, page 33. Organization and institutions as power sources. Power, particularly its effective exercise to achieve certain ends, does not flow solely from the ownership and control of property as thing and property as right. Effective working power, the essence of social power, requires a coordinated organization of power resources. It is not the mere possession of power and resources of power which flows from their possession which enables some groups to dominate others, but it is more so the organization of power on the part of the dominant group, in contrast to the relative disorganization of the subordinate group, which may possess potentially more powerful human and or material resources than the dominant group, which ensures their control over the subordinate group. So that said to me is something Dr. Maat said earlier is basically is that you don't necessarily have to be monetarily or in a political or social structure that is higher than that of someone who holds power over you, but it's the organization of the resources that you do have is what in essence gives you your power. So a lot of times people say, well, you know, white supremacy, they got all that money and they got all these ties and they have this and that. Well, this is true, but also at the same sense, that doesn't not necessarily make us powerless because they have more resources, because we can simply use the resources that we do have as our exposure.
And or you know how to organize what we have to work with.
Exactly. It says the subordinate are often more numerous in their contribution within the social division of labor and within the social division of consumption makes them indispensable as a group to the dominant, because there's more, always more of the underdog than the people that are on top. And if only the underdog would realize that if they were to organize, they could probably overtake the people that are on top, but we don't realize that because we don't see the power within ourselves.
Absolutely.
These two, I definitely was waiting to get to these two tables here because these blew me away. Did anybody else find it? Absolutely.
Oh yeah, man.
Oh my goodness.
And you know what I was thinking, sis? And I spoke to Baba Sababu yesterday, and I was telling him these tables dismiss the whole idea that Europeans came over here and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps.
Exactly.
I mean, they say that. They're so quick to say that. Well, my family came over here and we were dirt poor and we pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Not exactly. And I think that we need to take our time, sis, and go through each one of these statements. We'll go read each one of these. I want to read the chart thoroughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That did it for me. That blew. I already post that on my Facebook.
Set it off, Sister Camille.
Okay, 1675, Massachusetts Bay Colony seized plantation rights in 6 square mile tracts to worthy individuals. The population of the colony included black slaves as well as free blacks. Neither were treated as worthy individuals eligible for land grants. So basically, we couldn't get into that land.
Nope. 1683, Maryland and Virginia established 50-acre land grants to settlers who pay their own way across the Atlantic. Blacks were given a free ride in slave ships and thus were not eligible for grants.
And that's where the majority of land comes from, because all you had to do was get here and you got free land if you could work the land.
And you know, this spoke volumes to me because I live in Maryland. And so when I read this, I said, wow, so they got 50 acres of land. 50 acres. It says 1785, the federal ordinance of 1785 authorizes the sale of 640 acre tracts to settlers for $1 per acre. As slaves, blacks were legally prohibited from owning property.
Somebody mute your mic, please. Mute your mic. Somebody, I think it's John. Okay, all right. Okay, 1800. The federal government establishes liberal credit privileges in Western territories for buyers of public land at a price of $1 an acre. Slaves not eligible and free blacks generally considered uncredit worthy.
The Federal Preemption Act grants land settlers rights up to 160 acres each at $1.25 per acre. the vast majority of blacks are still slaves and ineligible to own property. Evidence of significant participation by free blacks.
1850, the beginning of the massive federal land grant program for private railroad companies. Outright awards of 130 million acres frequently include property for 20 miles on either side of roadbeds. These lands later found to contain billions of dollars of mineral reserves. Black businessmen never considered qualified to acquire, finance, or operate railroad.
Wow. I think we all know the struggle of the brothers on the railroad. You know, I've seen a few movies about it. It was hard back then.
Absolutely. A lot of them died. They did. From inhaling, you know, a lot of that, much of that debris. A lot of those brothers, you know, a lot of them died. And here it is, you have the federal, okay, let's keep going. That's
all right. The Homestead Act grants settlers 160 acre tracts of federal lands without charge. Over 250 acres of public lands transferred almost exclusively to whites in most important land program in American history. Negro claimants blocked by lynch mobs, intimidation, and refusals of local authorities to protect their claims.
Course is the
settlers scrambled to claim the choices. Savage lynchings, Ku Klux Klan terrorism, and Jim Crow legislation kept Negroes out. Later, the heirs and successors of white settlers were to discover billions of dollars of petroleum resources.
1920, the Mineral Leasing Act authorizes the federal government to lease public land for the exploration of oil, gas, and other minerals. Need not apply. In public awards was the established policy of the federal government in the 1920s. So this was institutionalized, like this was an established practice. Black people from wealth. I just wanted to add that he, you know, he didn't emphasize that, but he said in the 1920s, it was an established policy of the federal government to exclude Black people from accumulating wealth.
And that's why they owe us reparations.
Oh, they owe us a lot. 1926, the Federal Air Commerce Act authorizes the granting of monopoly air routes to qualified aviators. The nation's airlines are born. 20,000 white pilots learned their trade in the rigidly segregated World War I Army Air Corps, ensuring that the ownership of commercial aviation would be lily white.
So the federal, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sister Camille. I'm speaking out of order. Go ahead, sis.
Go ahead if you want to add on to that. I was just going to read the next.
No, go ahead, sis.
1927, the Federal Radio Act authorized broadcast franchises to private citizens. Under settled policy of the federal government, no grants were made to Negroes. Licenses currently valued in the billions of dollars, now held almost exclusively by whites. That's why we have no media.
And we say that a lot, you know, like, oh, Black people don't own the media, Black people don't control the media. Well, like you said, in 1927, when they were issuing out, you know, broadcast stations, and I'm thinking right now as an engineer, I'm thinking about the frequency spectrum that they allow different people to broadcast information across, it wasn't given to us. So this spectrum was divided up by, you know, it was given to white folks. Well, you know, the spectrum was, you know, held exclusively by white folks in the 1920s, in 1927. And this was around the time where mobile radio communication became extremely popular. And so I'm not going to get into that, but that's when it became very popular around the 1920s, 1930s.
Okay. 1939, the Federal Communication Commission issues the first license for television broadcast stations. No grants made. Is that what one she just read or no?
No,
okay,
I read it.
Okay, no grants made to Negroes until token awards of the late 1970s. In 1980, all television franchises valued at $5 million to $10 billion held exclusively by whites. 1941, government contracting becomes a major factor in the sales revenue and profits of private enterprises. Race discrimination and government contract awards becomes the official policy of the United States government. During the years 1941 to 1980, approximately $3 trillion in contract awards were made almost exclusively to white-owned firms. So basically, since 1675, of course, until now, but definitely noted here till 1941, we were exclusively kept out of ownership rights.
Yep.
So the next chart says universally practiced race discrimination is a standard form of cartel power. And so they're functioning like a cartel. You know, it's so hypocritical to be, Sister Alima, when I listen to our government criticize like the Mexican cartels and how much power they have and the ruthlessness of these cartels, when in actuality, our American government functions like a cartel. They do the same thing. They utilize the military for force, right? The military, the police, they kill their citizens, they censor their citizens. It's just, you know, we think that we don't think that they are a cartel because we don't see tanks, you know, rolling down the street. Like in Mexico, you might have a tank and soldiers occupying your neighborhood. And I think because we don't see it, we don't believe that we exist in an environment the same as them because we don't see the tanks. We only see that if it's like an uprising or something crazy, you know. But other than that, we don't see that on a daily basis, so we don't think that it's happening. When in actuality, it is. Our American government does function exactly like a cartel, and Dr. Amos Wilson talks about that in this on page 35 in this chart. Could we go down and read it, or?
I think we should move on because this chapter has like 50 something pages and we're only
let's keep on going. Let's keep on going. But this is a decent chart. This is a decent chart to read, to understand, and to realize that our government functions just like a cartel. But let's go, Sister Alima. Let's roll.
All right. What did I have here? Human social organization, not mere individual self-interest behavior, essential to the generation and application of power. I had that highlighted. I also had, as alluded by Wrong, 1988, the more people who contribute their holdings of personal, social, and or material resources to a common pool, the greater the egregious resources to pursue a group's goal and enhance its power are likely to be. So he's basically saying that the more that people that pool their resources together, the more power they will acquire as an organization. But for chapter 36, page 36 and 37, they're speaking more on getting into organized networks and groups and power. So I had the first paragraph here highlighted. To be organized is to be structured, to assume and operate according to a discernible pattern. Organizations systematically channel and distribute energy of force along definite pathways in order to achieve some definite outcome. Organization imposes order and direction on otherwise random, relatively diffuse, unfocused, or erratic phenomena in order to generate a focused, concentrated form of power directed towards accomplishing particular goals. And this reminded me of the conscious community online. And when they talk about organizing and networking and how when you're not organized in networks, you're just really random and you're just erratic and just all over the place. And that reminds me of how many in the conscious community are, because there is no unity. There is no organization amongst everyone. So everyone's just trying to facilitate their own ideologies and what they feel is necessary, but no one's pooling their resources together. So everyone has their own idea and vision, and they want to implement it themselves because everyone wants to be the boss, not understanding that a lot of our visions and things that we want to do are intertwined. So we would be benefited if we were to pool our resources and work together instead of trying to have a million different groups trying to save African people.
Right.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add to what Sister Alima says. So he's talking about social organization. And let's be clear that, and he defines this on page 36, that a social organization refers to the interactive uniting of a number of persons into a group, right? Who through the structured use of their aggregated resources act to achieve the group's purposes and goals. And you know what, Sister Alima, like you said, we have no social organization. And when you think of the conscious community, you have a group of people, like you said, but no one's aggregating their resources to accomplish a goal. And a matter of fact, what is the goal?
I don't know.
What is the goal and what is the purpose? Have those things been outlined?
No.
Like you said, so what's the point?
There is no point.
So what's the point?
That's why I'm not even on it. There is no point. And I figured that out. It's like, why am I just wasting my breath every day? It's a waste. Okay, page 37 family.
Organizing and like you said, in building.
That's
organizing
right.
in building. And here in Baltimore, and my brother T can attest to this, we're getting ready to start an investment group. And we're trying to get like 20 people together, 20 of us together. And in an account, we're going to get 20 people together. And then we're going to decide on what do we want to invest in. Do we want to invest in real estate? Do we want to invest in stocks? What do we want to invest in? And once we determine that, we're going to put $50 a month into an account. By the end of the year, we'll have $12,000 in this account. And we can take this $12,000 and purchase a property, or take this $12,000 and invest it in some shares. So we'll decide on what we want to do with that $12,000. Again, that's pooling your resources together to accomplish a goal. What is the end goal? Is it to buy real estate? Is it to buy real estate? Is it to invest in a business? Is it to, what is it? So we're going to come up with that in a few. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. If you're interested, let me know, sis.
That's nice. That sounds like something I'm a part of. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. I haven't been to a meeting in a while. I've only been to one meeting since I've been here. I've been here for a year. I feel like last time we talked, they had like a good $50,000 pooled together. Wow. And we were talking about locations and everything, and just haven't heard nothing else, which comes to be the problem with Black organizations. We can't stay organized. It's like we can get together and we can start and get it rolling, and it's all good for a few weeks, and then it just trickles off. It just trickles off, and eventually no one's left. But that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. But page 37, families, keep rolling. Second paragraph. Since a social organization wields influence, brings about changes, i.e. does work, it may be said to express power. The dynamic pattern of social relations or interactions between the members of a social organization provides the means by which it does work or expresses its power. This may be said to represent a power network. That is, organization itself may be conceived of as a power network or as composed of power networks. So they said a power network is just organization within itself. Anybody want to pick out anything else on 37 before we roll to 38?
No, just what you said, that social organization is a power. Like you said, it can be conceived as a power network or composed of power networks. No, I think you, I did want to emphasize, I'm looking at the paragraph down the bottom where he lists the sources of social power, or the sources of social power, or basically the organizations of power. And it says, conceiving of societies as multiple overlapping and intersecting power networks. So when we're looking at a society, he's saying conceive it or think of it as multiple overlapping and intersecting power networks. So we're talking about organizations. He said gives us the best available entry into the issue of what is ultimately primary or determining in societies. A general account of societies, their culture, their history, can be best given in terms of the interrelations of what I will call the four sources of social power: ideological, economic, military, and political, IEMP relationships. So then he goes on to say that these are overlapping networks of social interaction, not dimensions, levels, or factors of a single social totality. This follows from my first statement. 2, they are also organizations, institutional means of attaining human goals. So the four sources of power, and he's right, when you look at all these different societies and cultures, you see 4 main sources of power. They have a military, they have a political body, they have, what else is it? Ideology, and they have an economic system. Those are the 4 things you see when you scrutinize or when you examine a society. And you see those things because those are the sources of power. And these entities are utilized, as the text says, to accomplish a goal. So you have to have a military, you have to have some sort of ideology, right? You have to have the economics, and you also have to have the politics governing body. Okay, we can move on, sis.
All right.
I have something on 38, page 38. Collective power is enhanced in a social group to the degree that its control is institutionally based on commonly accepted values, rules, laws, and norms. Cultures and societies normally achieve their routine goals through institutionalizing much of their social behavior and activities by founding and operating institutions designed to organize social attitudes and behavior toward the accomplishment of certain tasks.
Powerful. That was powerful.
I mean, most of the institutions out here, you know, the things that we do, that we come up with, the things that we create, we haven't institutionalized them in a way to, you know, be able to proliferate information to our people, you know, properly, and also to benefit economically from our ideas and concepts.
Exactly.
Okay, so it goes as groups which lack collective organization or whose collective organizations are inadequate are vulnerable to being in actuality organizationally
outmaneuvered
by more powerfully organized, thereby the weaker group may be thereby forced to comply with the demands of the stronger due to the greater power and tactical weaker group is obtained by having been forcefully integrated into inferior or subordinate positions within the confines of the collective and distributed social class or stratification. Stronger group. Yep. Yeah, that's for me. That just that, you know, that shows where
I can't hear you, sis.
How now? I was saying that shows how we're controlled financially and mentally. You know, we're made to have to do things, you know, like the agenda of homosexuality. Those things are forced on our people because we don't have strong enough institutions to combat. You know, we don't educate. Basically, we don't educate our own. So when our children go to school, they're, you know, put through these, you know, they're shown certain things. They're also, you know, not taught about civics and things that better us as a group. So that's what I got out of, you know, that paragraph, you know, and them forcing their agendas on us. You know, when you hear Black people parrot things that you hear coming from the dominant culture media, such as well, we got Black on Black crime. Those are the kinds of things that, you know, we've absorbed when we lack culture. So we start parroting the things that, you know, that they use to oppress us.
Yeah, so like you said, sis, driving home your point, you know, just to reinforce what you said, they institutionalize their thoughts, their beliefs, their behavior. They institutionalize it, and then they, you know, they create these institutions to teach their ideas, their beliefs, their vision. And these institutions are there not only to teach their ideas, but also to perpetuate it, right? To perpetuate it. And then the next generation is going to come in, they're going to learn it. So it's also going to perpetuate their ideas, their beliefs, their overall vision. And so like you said, Sister Camille, and Dr. Amos Wilson talks about this a lot, how we need to erect our own, you know, we need to take control of our own educational institutions and begin to condition the minds of our own, you know, our own, period.
Absolutely. And that's where it starts.
Exactly. Exactly. Go ahead, sis.
Huh?
No, I just want to go into 39. I had a paragraph.
Okay, let's go.
Mine. I think it's like the second paragraph. Man, 1968. It should be noted that it is diffused power generated spontaneously based on commonly held attitudes, values, and modes of behavior, which facilitates the conspiring of one group against another, without their conspiracy being deliberately planned and executed by any one person within them. At times, cultures, societies, and various types of social organizations may be conceived of as conspiracies, as the means whereby persons cooperate towards an end, whether good or evil, their effects on their own and other groups being more determined by the very compelling logic of their shared beliefs and practices than by the machinations of some apparent or secretive group within them consciously pursuing some particular goal. Yeah, that's aspect. We know sometimes we say we're our own worst enemies, but through the institutions, they get people to conspire against one another unknowingly, really. You know, as I spoke about people parroting things from the dominant culture, you know, those are, you know, all invisible mechanisms that people don't realize that they're, you know, being, you know, basically more like a puppet, you know, that's turning you, you're being controlled. And if you're unaware of it, you'll just be, you know, you'll harm your group of people unknowingly.
Yeah, and another thing, Sister Camille, what I got out of reading page 39 is what binds a group of people together. Like when I'm looking at, I think the third paragraph, the second or third paragraph, when he says things like shared beliefs, practice, and then he goes on to say strong solidarities are based on commonalities of the ethnicity, language, custom, religion, values, a sense of superiority, a strong sense of mission, and the determination to dominate others or to liberate themselves from or protect themselves against domination by others. So when I was reading page 39, I couldn't help but to think of, you know, when I think of ethnic groups or social groups, like these are the elements that would bind a group or would engender or foster solidarity, you know, within a group of people. So that's what I saw also when I was looking at page 39. So I think that with Black people, and I remember, and I know Sister Alima's husband was also on the documentary, Revolution or Exodus. And he asked the question, he said, what do you think will be the catalyst or the impetus? He said the impetus, I believe. He said, what will be the impetus for Black people to really unite and accomplish something, you know? And I said, it should be the fact that we share the same, you know, we're trying to get free. We want to liberate, you know, it should be liberation that binds us, our desire to want to be free. But ultimately that's not, you know, I was having a conversation with my brother T the other day, and I'm like, what will get us together to mobilize? I'm talking about collectively, not in spurts, but collectively, nationally, organized to accomplish something. And I was talking to you, Brother T, about values. I said half of us, you know, we don't even share the same values or the same beliefs or the same practices. So I'm like, what would bind us together to go out here and to really do this work and start nation building? In my opinion, it should be to get free. But, you know, some of us don't want to get free. We're so indoctrinated that we don't even want to get free. So we can't even say that that's something that would bind us or something that would, you know, bind us together, you know, to go out here and begin to do this work. But that's all I have for page 39. Sister Alima?
Well, in reference to being free, it's definitely subjective. It depends on the person's point of view. Some people just want to be left alone here. They just want Black people to be treated fine. And for them, that's their freedom. Just leave us alone. Don't give me credit because I'm Black. Don't follow me because I'm Black. Like, that's freedom to them. So that's an issue in itself. Or what is like you said, what is the goal? But we all have different goals here. And I'm learning that because one of my goals is repatriation. a lot of people's goals here is to try to fix this stuff, you know, here in America. So it's definitely very subjective, Queen.
Yeah.
On page 40, we get on to talk more about social organization, and he breaks it down and starts talking about solidarity and social structure. He says social organization and collective identity are clearly matters of degree with respect to which groups or social categories vary widely, but organization and identity or solidarity are themselves the fundamental collective resource underlying and making it possible the mobilization of all others. So he's saying that the collective identity of the group and individual solidarity is what builds that fundamental, is what builds that foundation in order for the mobilization of people. So once again, what we were just saying, what's the goal? It's collective identity. African people here in America, what's our collective identity? I don't know. Some people think they're Moors. I mean, some people think they're Native Americans, you know, it's just all over the globe as far as us here in America. So that's what another thing that makes mobilization hard, because we have common interests, but we have different goals. So it talks about solidarity, and he says that solidarity includes, I'm at the 4th paragraph, family. Solidarity includes the degree of awareness of boundaries between group members and non-members, the familiar, Sumerian in-group, out-group distinction, the intensity of mutual emotional identifications with one another based on a sense of similarity or consciousness of kind, rituals symbolizing belonging and collective identity, and so on. Social organization comprises the degree and complexity of division of labor, the presence of leadership or a power structure, rules governing interactions between members and outsiders, and much else. I guess I'll finish that. These different aspects of solidarity and social organization amount, of course, to well-known variable characteristics of what sociologists call social structure. So social structure involves social organization and solidarity between people in the group and people that's not inside the group, apparently, from what it's saying here. And those interactions help to govern the thoughts and beliefs of the members, which i.e. forms their power structures. Anybody want to point out anything on page 41?
Let me see, I have highlighted. Okay. So I know that Dr. Amos Wilson talks a lot about the ideology of individualism. And, you know, going back to page 40, but without, of course, reading everything that you read, Sister Alima, he's saying that, he says organizations, and I know I just said I wouldn't read it, but I'm looking at it right now. Organization and identity or solidarity are themselves the fundamental collective resources. So he's listing the collective resources, and our collective resources would be our identity, our organizations, our group size, our job skill, pulling together our resources. So this will be our collective resources. And then, but he's saying that the downfall with the Black community is that we've been conditioned to think of ourselves as individuals. I'm looking at the second paragraph on page 41. And, you know, I have underlined the white community's unceasing efforts to autonomize the Black community into mere aggregate of disunified individuals lacking or weak in social solidarity in organizations. So we have to rid ourselves, sis. I mean, we talk about nation building and social organization and social power. Notice everything is social organization, social power, nation building, which requires you to, of course, have a communal mindset. But we're individuals, we're disunified individuals. A lot of us have been inculcated with the ideology of individualism. So we even had to change our mindset on how we think of ourselves. And I remember in one of Dr. Amos Wilson's lectures, he charged us to stop. He said, being an individual is a myth. He called it a social myth. He said, because as long as you belong to a social structure, he said, the only way to be a true individual, he said, is if you were to live in outer space by yourself, right? So he said, calling yourself an individual in itself is a social myth. And so, you know, he charged the audience and the viewers to think of ourselves as an extension of a collective. And so we even need, in my opinion, Sister Alima, to change our mindset with regards to that. We need to really rid ourselves of that whole ideology of individualism before we can even organize, before we can nation build. We really need to rid ourselves of that whole ideology of individualism.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a trick, you know. All other groups, you know, they operate as a group. You know, they do things, they have enough power where it appears like they're individuals, but they aren't. Whenever, you know, whenever a crisis happens, you see how they all come together on code. You know, the Asian community, European community, they all function and look out for one another. Even if one of them is in the wrong, they don't speak out against the person. You know, they operate and they look out for one another. We've been sold a bill of goods of individualism, and that, you know, that
absolutely, sis.
All
right,
go ahead, brother.
Fear has mainly guided our consciousness towards this identity crisis. So we've seen what happened when we mobilize as a group of people.
Interest first is
hold on, sis.
Is wrong.
Hold on, sis. Go ahead, brother.
I didn't know if she was finished her thought.
Yeah, I've just finished.
Okay, I apologize, sis. We've seen what happened with groups, with our, you know, even our social groups. What happened to institutions like the Black Church being firebombed. If we look at the organizations that came together, because I've been in a bunch of organizations, and I've seen a lot of what begins to happen in the organizations. The identity crisis among our people is so great. Even when we organize together around a particular goal, it no longer becomes about the goal. It starts to deal with individual ideology, goals, aims, and objectives. So that trumps the goal. So we never get an opportunity to mobilize towards the goal. We come together united around a cause, but then now the cause becomes ourselves. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And that's that what you were speaking to, Dr. Maat, about that value system that we took on upon our enemy. You see what I'm saying? We took it on as our own. And our identity crisis speaks to the dominant culture being dominating, you know, in the mind, being dominant. You see what I'm saying? So even that we had to use that term, dominant culture, that would mean that we exist in a recessive culture. You see what I'm saying? When we're looking at that opposite, you know, so, you know, like I was in a bunch of organizations. I could use one for example. I was in the New Black Panther Party for self-defense from 98. So from 98 to 2002, I was in the New Black Panther Party. And I joined the organization after the Million Youth March, the first Million Youth March in Harlem. We heard Dr. Khaled speak. Everybody went. We was all fired up, and we went to the organization. And, you know, we joined. Well, I joined along with some other people from my neighborhood the next day. You see what I'm saying? So we were out there, and we were charged up. You understand what I'm saying? So we looked the part, we talked the part. Everything was good until people found out within the organizational structure that there was positions. So it changed from us just being mobilized and standing as a vanguard party from our people to people volleying in for position. So now you got subversive activity going on because somebody wants to be the chairman or somebody wants to be the minister of defense, or, you know, all of these things. So once this positional authority comes in, you see what I'm saying? Just like you were speaking, Sister Alima, about people wanting to be the boss. You understand what I'm saying? So that boss mentality came and trumped the organizational structure. So regardless to the organization, once we fall victim to those type of ills and those evils, they trump the overall success of the organization. So when we remove that and we approach it from that egalitarian African center, we wash away that need for individual accomplishment. The accomplishment and the goal is liberation and its freedom. So everything else is subservient to it. So our economic power, so our ideological differences, all of that are subservient to the goal. The goal is African liberation. We can move and mobilize around that idea and recognize that everybody has a part to play in that. So when Dr. Amos Wilson was speaking about division of labor, we can start breaking things down into, assigning jobs and positions and duties. And we know that those duties and positions are in line with the goal. You see what I'm saying? So that becomes a breakdown too, what I've seen for many of the organizational structures. So I just wanted to add that.
Excellent. Excellent, brother.
So then on page 41, moving on, he starts talking about the sources of organizational power. And he lists a few sources. One is wealth, numbers, and specialized facilities. He then goes into coordinated membership response. Do you guys want to elaborate on this, or we can just kind of go through it? Because I think it's kind of...
No, I just highlighted just like 2 sentences from each. So just from wealth, numbers, and specialized facilities, it's basically saying that by joining together, even poor people can have attributes of power of the elite. And then coordinated membership responses, he was basically saying the major source of organizational power lies in the ability to enable many people to take planned, concerted action. I just summed it up.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Factors affecting group power.
Now, these are kind of self-explanatory.
They really are. So we're just going to list them out. Size and organizational power, cohesiveness and action orientation, perceived role as power factor, organizational alliances, and countervailing power. So those are, like Sis said, pretty self-explanatory, and people can read them if they want to. Moving on, social power, but organized man. Yes.
So sis, look, I wanted to, the only thing I wanted to add to that is when I was reading countervailing power, I thought about Asians and whites. I thought about the power relationship between Asians and whites and the power relationship between blacks and whites. And so with the former, and I'm speaking about Asian and whites, Asians have a countervailing power against white domination. They do, because they've pulled their resources together. They're organized. They have a military. They have resources. They have an economic system. They have an ideology. And so they exhibit a countervailing power. And it says right here that a countervailing power says the opposite tendency of organized groups to oppose each other cooperate has been given the name of countervailing power. He says this theory states that the exercise of great power to inspire the organization of opposing power usually keeps one group from gaining complete control. So the Europeans don't have complete control because you have who now have a countervailing power, right? But when you look at us, like our relationship, African, the relationship between Africans and Europeans, we don't offer a countervailing power because we're not organized. We have the resources, we have the human and material resources, but we're not organized. We don't have a military. And I'm thinking about African Americans right now. Where's our military? We don't have a separate military.
Right.
We don't even have an agreed upon ideology. Economic system that we control, own, and operate. So we don't offer a countervailing power. So that's why we've been dominated and exploited by Europeans. So I thought about that. That was just one thing that stuck out in my mind. A few things that stuck out in my mind when I read this paragraph of countervailing power. I was thinking, wow, we don't have a countervailing power. So anyway, moving on.
And that's a good statement that you made there, Sister Maya, because he goes on early in the chapter talking about how the Koreans and other ethnic groups that, invade the Black community oftentimes are, minorities when it comes to voting and having people in political places for them, but they control masses of resources because of their group power.
We get into that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are. Absolutely, brother.
Social power of unorganized masses. I don't know if y'all wanted to go through that, but to me, that was it's just basically boycotting. He's talking about boycotting and not just spending power, but also in obedience, habits, political power. It's talking about the power of the masses and how the masses who may not have the power per se that they think they have, but they actually have the power to disobey, which in itself is a great power. If anybody wants to expand on that, but I'm just trying to bust it through because we literally have a lot more to go and it's already like 8:30.
I know, yeah, but I thought about the NFL boycott when I was thinking about this. I said, if black folks just cut off the daggone station, if the players sit out, you know, a few games, you know, Kaepernick probably will be playing tomorrow. Like you said, Sister Alima, I think that the masses, we don't understand how much power we have. We control the market. We control the market with our spending habits. Like you said, so we control the market. So Dr. Wilson calls that the power of mass market. So based on our decisions, what we want to buy, what we want to watch, we control the market. So that, you know, so then he goes into mass veto power through non-cooperation. So like you said, he says that the masses through non-cooperation, for example, passive resistance may exert power to bring about change. So the masses, we don't understand or see how much power we really have. You know, we don't see it. We don't see it in the people, the powers that be, again, like you said, Sister Alima, they count on our habit of obedience. They count on us being obedient to continue to control us. They count on that because the power really lies within the numbers and the masses are, you know, so, but moving on.
Okay, well, we can move on to 44.
Can I add a quick point?
Go ahead, brother.
I'll be real quick. I would say we got fractional spending power, you know, fractional economic power, because where does most of our money come from? So, you know, again, back to that, you know, that fear, the difference between us and our ancestors, majority of the wealth that was created came from the businesses that we created.
Exactly.
So that their ownership and all of these, you know, things that happened in between before 1965, I would say, you know, we were basically in control of our own destiny because we, you know, by law, we were not allowed to intermingle. So if you look today, it's a complete opposite. We own virtually nothing. So everybody is subservient to whoever pays them. You see what I'm saying? So that fear comes in again with that paycheck. So if it ain't a paycheck, it's government assistance or whatever. Not a lot of that wealth creation is coming from ourselves.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I just want to read the bottom line going into page 44. It says most of the institutional or social chain of command is not perceived by those subject to it as coercive and as an expression of dominance by a particular social class for which the command structure is designed to undemocratically benefit. All right, so they're saying that the people that are even involved in the structure, even the subordinate people, don't look at it as they're being dominant, right? Dominated. It says the chain of command or class structure is generally perceived by those who benefit from it least or who are oppressed by it as functionally necessary. In this instant, compliant behavior, even when such behavior perpetuates gross inequities, is seen as morally compelling, as right and proper in itself. And when I read that paragraph, Sister Alima, I thought about us in the government. You have people who really believe we need the government, no matter what the government does to us, no matter, you know, we look at the mass incarceration rates, we look at the rates of police brutality. Now, this is all happening from the government. You know, these are government officials that pass. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that no matter what the government does, you have some of us who believe that we need the government. They don't even think that the government is oppressing us, and they think that we need the government. Did anyone else want to expound on that paragraph or move ahead?
I'd like to move ahead.
Let's go.
On page 44, right?
Yes.
In an unjust social order, an order where one group abusively dominates another, the habit of obedience in the subordinate or abused groups functions to maintain that order. Subordinate groups thereby collude to perpetuate its own subordination and exploitation. This situation can only be changed by the destabilization and breakdown of the unjust social order, i.e., by radically reorganizing its structure of power relations And this can only be brought about by subordinate groups' refusal to comply with the demands of the dominant group, with which by the subordinate groups are all responsible for or crucial to maintaining the onerous social order in the first place. The subordinate group of obedience and engage in civil disobedience.
And you know what I thought about? Dr. Amos Wilson is saying, look, you know, if you guys want to bring about change, you have to be disobedient. But you know what, Sister Alima, a lot of people, and I don't know whether it was Brother T or Brother Knowledge Born who talked about fear, or the other brother, but people are so fearful. So people don't, being disobedient to the government, people don't want to die, and people don't want to go to jail. So, you know, so to ask, like, you know, and he goes on to talk about Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and he was saying civil disobedience is one of the primary means by which the masses of the oppressed may successfully oppose the power of a dominant oligarchy. So he's saying that you have to be disobedient. And look at Martin Luther King. He's a felon. People talk about felons. He's a felon. This man was locked up on numerous accounts. Okay, he was locked up. But you have a lot of people who don't want to be disobedient. Why? They're scared to go to jail. They're scared to lose their jobs. They're scared to die. They're scared. So they control us.
Scared.
Yeah, with fear. With fear. So I hear exactly what Dr. Amos Wilson is saying here. He's saying, look, you got to be disobedient to the power structure, you know, or, you know, to the power structure or to the power group, you know, if you want to invoke some change, but you have to be disobedient. And people are fearful. People don't want to disobey because they're afraid of the consequences or the ramifications.
Right. Yep, I totally agree.
Page 45, we can move on if no one wants to add. And this is going into what the brother Travis was talking about. And he was kind of jumping the gun. Sister Alima said, wait a minute, brother, because it's getting there where we talk about ethnic solidarity and power.
Yeah, Brother Travis can go ahead and bring us in on this one here.
You want me to start at the top, or?
You don't have to read it. You can just go ahead and expound upon what you was talking about earlier, because that's what we are now.
Okay, yeah. So what basically Dr. Amos was referring to, he was talking about how the things that merge us as a people, like, you know, the ideology that we want, just tying in the ideology, the culture, the religion. These are the things that the people who come into our community, like the Arabs here in Detroit. I find when I go out to like Dearborn, it looks like the Middle East. It looks the whole entire community, the businesses, the way they function as a society out there is like the Middle East. It's because that they have tapped into that group power. And the very things that merge them is their religion and their culture. And I think that's what we as a people are really lacking to, like you talked about the Maat, y'all were talking about early on, as us being so divided. We don't have that centralized sense of culture and spirituality like I think other communities who come into our communities that oppose us.
And you know, brother, what comes to mind, and Brother T can talk about this, I thought about the Jewish community. So he said in Detroit, you said it's the Arabic community, but in Baltimore, it's the Jews. And like you said, they're bounded by their culture and by their religion. And in Baltimore, the Jews have a very, very thriving communities in Baltimore. I'm thinking right now, Brother T, of like the Pikesville area, where the Jews only control that. So if you go through Pikesville, they own and operate the schools. They police their own communities. They own the real estate. They have synagogues in their community. So like you said, Brother Travis, and I hope I your name correctly, Brother Travis.
That's right.
So like you said, they're bounded by something, culture and religion. And you know, and so the question is, you know, with us, we're so, you know, we're all over the place, even in terms of our values, our beliefs, our goals. And so we, you know, when we talk about nation building and all of it, we have to come together and define what are our goals. what do we want to accomplish, and then begin to organize and pull together our resources. But we have to determine what even binds us. You know, back in the day, it was, you know, the struggle that binded people. It was the struggle. It was trying to get free. It was trying to get off the plantations. But now in 2017, with people being so comfortable, so lax, people have jobs, people, you know, they have their family life, they have this, they have that. What would really pull us together? Because it's not a shared culture. It's not shared beliefs. It's not shared values and practices. And like Sister Alima said, liberation is subjective at this point, because what may be liberating to her might be, you know, different from what may be liberating to me. So what at this point binds Black people?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we're aware that we're at war. I think it's so covert that the masses of us don't recognize it, don't recognize the sophisticated systems that we're dealing with. And so therefore, you tell somebody that has a job, a lot of people think that's the end all and be all. They can have a job and come home, chill, watch TV, whatever, smoke, drink a couple of beers, chill. You know, they think that's living, but they don't really understand. I think be done as far as educating people as to the systems that we're under, and then I think maybe we'll be able to get people together. But as long as people don't understand what we're dealing with, you know, even though you have a job, you know, I think it's I think that's what the issue is. They don't really get it.
And you hit the nail on the hammer when you said, Sister Camille, when you said that we need to, it goes back to education, because that's what education transmits. Education transmits an identity. It transmits a vision. You know, it transmits shared values and beliefs. Right. So it all boils down to being in control of our educational process, so that we can all be on the same accord regarding culture, beliefs, practices, social norms, information. Right. So, you know,
I think what stood out the most for me, family, is, and I'm glad that Baba Wilson had touched on this in the book, because when I think of Arabs and Asians and Jews, the first thing that comes to mind is not unity or organization. For me, it's exploitation. And the reason why, it's not because they're organized in a sense, or that they're united and this is why they thrive. They thrive because they exploit Black people. Who supports these businesses? Who is the major consumer in these Arab businesses, or the major consumer in these Asian businesses? It's African people. It's African American people. They exploit us. So that's where the majority of their wealth is coming from. So we actually have the power to starve out these particular entities, because they thrive off of our dollars. How many white people do you see in the Arab stores? Like, just think about that. You don't see white people in there. They don't shop in there. It's Black people, because typically they're located in the poorest of the communities where typically we live. It's exploitation.
Absolutely. But they pass on that skill of how to exploit us from generation to generation. Yes. If you think about how we were kids, I've been going to Arab stores since I was a kid.
Me too.
Our social conditioning is that we unconsciously go to their stores and patronize them.
That's right.
And they are, from generation to generation, are taught and pass on the way in which to extract resources to develop Dearborn here in Detroit.
Right. Yeah. I'd like to on that note, there's a paragraph on page 45 that I had highlighted that speaks exactly to that.
One at the bottom?
So, yes.
Oh yeah, that's too long. Don't read it.
Okay. Well,
I'm sorry, y'all.
I know. Now go ahead. That's page 46, because we getting down to the wire. We're getting down to the wire.
Anybody?
Ready. So we got ethnic.
Okay, well, ethnic and class resources, race, ideology, and the exploitability of Black Americans. So of course this goes deeper into our exploitation. I had just two things highlighted here. What is this? Third paragraph. Light and I don't know his name. I'm gonna say Bonic define these ethnic resources as social features of a group which co-ethnic business owners utilize in business or from which their business passively benefits. According to those authors, ethnic resources include values, knowledge, skills, information, attitudes, leadership, solidarity, and orientation to sojourning and institutions.
Mm-hmm. And I had highlighted class resources. So you looked at ethnic resources and I looked at class resources. And it says that class resources include material factors, private property and ownership of means of production or distribution, personal and familiar wealth and investments in human capital, education, training, etc., and cultural resources, bourgeois values, attitudes, knowledge, and skills transmitted intergenerationally in the course of primary socialization. So he's talking about, immigrant entrepreneurship and also ethnic entrepreneurship. And he was saying that, that they utilize their ethnic resources as well as their class resources to obtain immigrant entrepreneurship and also ethnic entrepreneurship.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, 47. Right. I thought this was very interesting here. First paragraph, I highlighted 6 sentences. It says Koreans were highly educated in their country of origin, often well endowed with money upon arrival in the U.S., and commonly middle or upper middle class in their social origin. On the other hand, Koreans also pass business information amongst themselves. They work long hours. They mobilize unpaid family labor. They maintain expected patterns of nepotism and employer paternalism, praise a Calvinist deity, utilize alumni, family, and congressional solidarity. So what that said to me is, although they may have came here with money, because that's not all it takes to unify and to get things accomplished is money, but they worked their asses off. And they did things and took jobs and ate crow, as my mom calls it, in order to get what it is that they needed to get to set up their generational wealth. Black people are not going to do that. We complain too much.
And free
There's
labor.
certain jobs we're not going to do. There's certain things we don't want to work with that person. You're not paying me. Say I want to open a business. I tell my cousin, hey, you want to work with me for 3 months? I can't pay you right now, but I got this vision and we're trying to set it up this thing. Let's do a family thing. I can't do that for free. We're not the type of people that are willing to sacrifice most of the time in order to achieve a certain goal. And so we have to understand that in order for people to get in positions of power, there's sacrifice that has to be had. And most of us don't want to do that. But a lot of other races, they were brought up and they were taught that sacrifice is everything. They get that. See, well, our ancestors sacrificed for us, so we think we don't have to do shit anymore.
Come on.
So because they put in the work, my ancestors, we always saying that, my ancestors went through that. They went through this, they went through that, but you didn't go through that. Where's your sacrifice going to come in order for Black people to obtain what we need to obtain? So I thought,
Sister Alima, I'm telling you, if I could hit a button and fire just go, when you said that we don't want to make the sacrifice, and you said Black people don't want, I just wanted to hit a button and just fire just.
We don't.
It's so true. Everything that you said is so true. We don't.
I think that's all too. I mean, I think indoctrination. I see a lot of parents that didn't want their children to work, doing odds and ends jobs. That's not or just doing chores. Those kind of things are. They make you unafraid to work. If you're doing any type of manual labor, people be talking about you killing yourself. I'm like,
I'll never forget. I was picking tobacco one time. I was working in North Carolina, y'all, and I was picking tobacco. I'm sorry, I just had to, because you said that I had to get that out here. Let me tell you how many Black people called me a slave, said I was stupid. There's no way in hell I'm going to be out there working in that sun. I mean, just all types of stuff that they said because they consider that to be a low class type of job, but Mexican people been putting their kids through college picking tobacco for decades. And they would never look at it that way, because at the end of the day, I was making like $800 a week in cash money. Good money picking tobacco. But Black people were like, that's a slave job, and how could you do that? And it's just amazing to me. We just not willing to sacrifice. Sometimes you got to do certain things you don't necessarily want to do for the better good.
Resources.
But resources, that's right. I mean, you get it however you can get it. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
If we had land, we would have our own tobacco.
People watch too much TV, but they would believe in what has replaced, you know, real activists and people that understand political and you know, political structures are entertainers, people that don't know anything. So our people live vicariously what they see on TV. They think they're supposed to be living like that. No, that's all make believe. You know, it's. I mean, I'm in the music industry. It's make believe. It's not for real. It's you know. So they believe in that they should have what they see these people on TV having. That's not, it has nothing to do with you. It's two different things, and they don't have that either. It's all make believe.
What were you saying, Brother Johnson?
Yeah, I was just about to say, I saw him saying something. Brother T, please go ahead, brother.
I hope, can you hear me?
Yes, brother.
I got a new mic. I was basically saying is the resources, having the land in order to grow tobacco. These are, and you actually picking the tobacco, actually seeing the hard work. But if we had our own land, if we had our own tobacco, we could sell that to neighboring counties, states, maybe countries.
That's
and it'd be a form of natural resources. So, I mean, there's no shame in it. Back home in Liberia, my aunt had a cocoa farm. And you think about back there was the average person makes $100 a year. But with a cocoa farm, she could sell on her own land and make her own income. So little things like that are benefits that we don't have no understanding because we're so far removed. But we gotta understand we do have a common history. We were descendants of slaves. Right. And remember all these things that we've been denied. So we do have a common point. And as he mentioned on the previous page, so we need to wake up, basically. So many words.
Brother. Dr. Maat?
I think Brother Knowledge Born wanted to add something. You wanted to add something, King?
Oh yeah, just real quick. Spike Lee told us that all those people was okay. All those people that exist in our community as roaches and bloodsuckers of the poor. And he told us that it was the right thing to support those businesses, by the way. And that film do the right thing. So if we look at these other nations that we talk about, we have to realize that they're satellites.
Hold on. You got to back up for me, brother, on that. You said Spike Lee said that it was okay?
Yeah, he said it was okay. Because if you remember that part in the movie, after they killed Radio Raheem, they went and destroyed Sal's Pizzeria where he worked at.
Right.
And when it came time to go to that Korean place, the one that was the real problem, he said, I'm not white. Me and you the same. You understand? He said, I'm black. I'm not white. I'm black. You see what I'm saying? Right. So that whole time that he was disrespecting all the black people who came into that store, him and his wife and all of that, you see what I'm saying? He wasn't black until they was coming to give him some reckoning. He was black. You understand what I'm saying? So Spike Lee said that was okay. You see what I'm saying? And he was like, no, we're not the same. The elder was telling him, open your eyes, because he was looking at that exploitation, all those things that happened. You see what I'm saying? So we became accepting of these type of people in our community and that treatment, saying that this was okay. You see what I'm saying? So whether we got it from an Arab, whether we got it from an Indian, whether we got it from a Hispanic or whomever, we see a satellite of their population. They come and get those jobs and open up those businesses, and that wealth goes back to their country, to their families in their country. It doesn't come, you see what I'm saying? It doesn't even, go anywhere within anybody's community. It goes back to their country. 80 or 90% of it is already earmarked. So we only see satellites of those people. You see what I'm saying? So we don't have a satellite. We exist as a comprised amalgamation of a population with no national identity. So we're not working for ourselves. We're not even working for our family. We're only working to pay bills. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So we're not in a position to where we're even earmarking any funds for any type of national or local or even family goals. So we have to begin to look within our family dynamic to establish family dynamic, community dynamic, local dynamic, state dynamic, and then national dynamic, and then international dynamic. You see what I'm saying? So then we can have a satellite that's interconnected to where which though now we can speak about those goals of nation building and building wealth and obtaining wealth. There's opportunities to invest in the continent. You see what I'm saying? So that there's places over there in Senegal and other places like that where there are investment opportunities to get land, to own businesses and all these other particular things that are out there. Then we could be in that position, but that position starts with our family first, our immediate family, and then nuclear and extended. You see what I'm saying? So I just wanted to speak to that.
Absolutely. So I just want to drive home, that between pages 46 and 47, he's talking about, entrepreneurship, immigrant entrepreneurship. He's saying, meaning, the self-employment within the immigrant group, and ethnic entrepreneurship, of course, which denotes ethnic minority specialization in self-employment. And he's entrepreneurship of the immigrant group and ethnic group is explained by their resources. So he defines ethnic resources and also class resources. He ends this discussion, I want to say it's on page 49, but at the end of page 47, and we talk about this a lot, Sister Lima, he says that an economic system is ultimately a social system, right? He said it's a social system, a system of coherent, cohesive social values, attitudes, relations, arrangements, and behaviors consensually shared by a distinguishable group, a group which possesses and expresses a group consciousness, self-consciousness, awareness, and identity, all held together and motivated by a group-based, self-interested system of ideas. And remember, Sister Alima, on a lot of the Tea Talk with the sisters, Sister Monica would say that an economic system is built on relationships.
That's right.
So Dr. Amos basically said the same thing. He said it's a social system,
right?
A social system. So I think that Black people, in order for us to even develop an economic system, we have to learn how to have healthy relationships.
Right.
And Brother Bowen said, and it starts within the home, because in the home, that's where you learn how to have relationships with people. That's where that training comes from. In your home, you learn how to deal with people. You learn how to respect boundaries inside of your home. So I think that before we even develop this economic system, we have to learn how to have healthy relationships with people, because ultimately an economic system, as Dr. Amos Wilson said, it is a social system.
Dr. Maat, I had a question for you.
Yes.
My question is to you. Why is it that I find that cult groups tend to be able to pull that off real quickly? They have like a charismatic leader. He can mobilize the people real quick. They can they'll go out and they'll put their resources right into the group. Yahweh Ben Yahweh in Miami. He had hotels. They bought a mall complex. It seems Dr. York, yes indeed, the Nation of Islam under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Yes.
It seems, why is it that only cult groups of our people can pull this off, but people who may be in Pan-Africanism or consciousness can't pull that off?
Because they have to have a certain level of admiration for you. That's what I've learned about Black people. It depends on the level that they see you as. That's why Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and others were able to captivate the people. It was something about them that Black people liked, and they rock with it. Because one thing I've learned with Black people is if you have a good enough talk game, they're going to rock with you. And you don't really have to do too much for them. I mean, Obama just had a nice talk game and looked like us, and people held him down for 8 years straight. So I find that we're very persuasive people, and that very, very gullible and easily persuaded people. So which is in a way though, that's kind of a good thing though. Because what if we actually had someone who was actually like another Malcolm who didn't flip it towards the end, who actually captivated the people? Maybe that's what Black people needs, because that's the only thing that seems to work, even if it's temporary.
But I have a problem with it. Why? The reason why I have a problem with it is because of when they die, the people had held him in such high regards, they didn't get a sense of collective identity. It became a personality cult. So when that person dies, they get confused. Like when Malcolm died, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, gone. When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad made his transition and his son took over, the organization fails. When Marcus Garvey left, the UNIA could have still been going on, but it seems like, when you have an individual charismatic leader, when there's no succession of power, and that other person can be held in high regard, you're in trouble. Seems like.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Now, if the organization becomes a satellite or an extension of a collective power, that's how the organization sustains. You see what I'm saying? So you can have a face, you can have somebody who talks, but they speak for the collective. You understand what I'm saying? They speak for the collective. The demise of our community comes in when everybody doesn't have to be in the organization, but everybody has to support the organization. If this is the organization that we use, you see what I'm saying? A lot of people from, that were around during the rise of the Nation of Islam weren't members. Right. They were just supporters. They knew when the brothers and sisters came through, just like with these organizations, you have to build a support base. You see what I'm saying? I spent 17 years in the military. Everybody's not on the front line in war. You have to have a support element to be able to sustain the war effort. So our support element in order to sustain our liberation war effort is our economics, is our skills, and us placing value in those skills and marketing, bringing those skills to market and raising awareness and having that global reach to sustain our war effort. So it becomes a global community because we're operating in a global market. You see what I'm saying? Like Dr. Maat has one of the best examples of that with Meltrek. With that tool. That tool is something that's universal that can go all around the world. You see what I'm saying? So it's not even locked to one particular demographic. Everybody across the planet can invest in Meltrek and yield those type of positive results. And then at the end, Dr. Maat know what to do with the money when she get it. Same with with Sister Alima, she know what to do with the money when she get it. Like, like Brother Jay, what to do. Sister, Kalima, but we have to have that value and purpose. You see what I'm saying? We have to choose. We say race first all the time. We should just change it to race only. You understand what I'm saying? Because first would imply that you're doing something secondary, or your primary goal, aim, and objective is self-preservation. Let's deal with that. Let's deal with that only. You see what I'm saying? Right. Let's deal with that only. That's where the breakdown comes in. We trap ourselves in particular words, and the words is indicative of language, and language is indicative of culture, and now we carrying out a culture of destruction towards ourselves. You see what I'm saying? So, that organizational breakdown survives individual personality when it speaks for the collective. You see what I'm saying? When the collective is tied in and there's a buy-in. I don't care if I'll go work a $3 job. You understand what I'm saying? $3 hour jobs, but I know that my money that's earmarked is for liberation. I'm at that job getting $3 an hour, but I know $2 of those dollars is going to liberation. You see what I'm saying? So everybody is. If I'm going to school, if I'm learning a trade, all of this is for the benefit of the goal. You see what I'm saying? All of this comes in as the benefit of the goal.
And see, Knowledge Born, that's where education comes into play, because our educational process should transmit a collective vision.
Exactly.
You get what I'm saying? That's why we need to start educating our own babies, because we need to develop that, create that mindset, or cultivate that mindset within our children, a collective vision. So like you said, when you get your job, let's say you do have to go into the dominant society to work, but like you say, when you get your money, you know where to put it, you know what to do with it. We don't teach our babies that. So you know what they do with their money? They give it back to someone. They give their money away to people who don't look like them, or they invest in things that aren't viable, things that aren't sustainable, Gucci belts, Michael Jordan sneakers, because they weren't taught. And so that's why I totally understand the importance of erecting our own educational institutions and being in control of the conditioning process of our babies. But so I want to move on because we got 7 pages left, and we can move through this. I'm at the bottom of page 48, and he's talking about 2 broad interacting factors. He said would seem to account for the domination and exploitation of the relatively large African American consumer market by other ethnic groups. So we're being dominated and exploited for 2 reasons. And this is what he says. He says the absence of a strongly held African-centered economic ideology, right? We're not African-centered. We don't have a strong African-centered economic ideology. We're not spending our money with our self-interest in mind. When I spend my dollars now, and I'm telling you guys, my household can attest to what I'm getting ready to say. I constantly think about how often do I circulate the Black dollar? You know, when we go out and eat, do we go to the soul food restaurant that's Black owned and operated, or the vegan spots in Baltimore, Maryland? Brother T will tell you there's a lot of vegan and vegetarian spots that are Black owned and operated. Even down to ordering clothes online or tennis shoes, or try to be conscientious of how I spend my money and with whom I spend my money. You know what I mean? And so I see what Dr. Amos Wilson is saying. He said the absence of a strongly held African-centered economic ideology. We spend our money with everybody. It's easy to exploit us and dominate us if you just spend your money and you give it away to anybody. And then he says, and of a well-organized, Black-owned and controlled market system on the part of the African community. We don't have a strong Black-owned and controlled market system. Now, we do have a lot of brothers and sisters selling things. We can go online. We do have, but we haven't organized these different things into a system, a market system where someone can go into the system and say, yes, I need, toilet paper. I need paper towels. I need this. I need that. An actual system. Right now, it seems to me that we have a lot of brothers and sisters selling shit. And yes, I said shit. We have a lot of brothers and sisters selling things. I have clothes. I have books, I have cartoons, I have this, but these things need to be organized into an actual market system. I completely concur with Baba Amos in that those are the 2 things that allow us to be dominated and exploited. The fact that we don't have a strongly held African-centered economic ideology, and the fact that we don't own and control a market system. The difference between people who have a store and selling some stuff versus people who have actual system. And then he ends this this section. Black American economic subordination is the result of deliberate economic oppression by other groups, primarily the white American community. And remember, we read that chart, I believe that was on page 34. He said, aided and abetted by immigrant groups, and secondarily, the result of the failure of African-American leadership to forge a race-based ideological consensus and economic program. This is why we are economically subordinate. A, we were systematically locked out of wealth by the white American community. 2, this oppression was aided and abetted by immigrant groups, Asians and Arabs coming into the community, and we're spending our money with them. He said, and lastly, the result of the failure of our leadership to forge a race-based ideological consensus and economic program. Remember, we were fighting for integration. We were fighting to be a part of their system, to shop in their stores, to eat in their restaurants, okay? And so our leaders weren't fighting for a race-based ideological consensus and economic program. We were fighting to be accepted and fighting to be accepted into their system. And so these were the things that contributed to our economic subordination. So now he's going into organizing Black power. And Baba Amos provides us with a flow chart on page 50, where he talks about, hold on, I'm highlighting as I go along. He's talking about how we can, okay, this is our national political economic system. So what does that look like? And he put it in a chart form, and this is just a proposal. I was talking to Baba Sababu about this yesterday, and he was saying, look, this book was written, you know, in 1995, you know, almost 20 some odd years ago. So he said that, you know, there's always room to, you know, improve and update some of their suggestions. So this was just a suggestion on page 50. National political and economic system for African American people. He said that there needs to be a president of the council. There needs to be a president of the council. And then he said there needs to be a national council of major Black organizations and institutions. So he's saying that this national council would debate and propose specific political, economic, and social policies which apply to the community as a whole, as well as its relations to other national communities, foreign communities, African diasporic nations, and the Pan-African economic system. Then he goes on to say that we also should have underneath that the National Executive Office, which would create and execute practical ways and means of carrying out the proposals of the National Council. So the National Council would function more of a think tank and would come up with, I guess, our economic, social, and political agendas. And the National Executive Office would create and execute ways of carrying out those proposals of the National Council, and then also monitor their success and effects on the national community. Next, he has listed the state regional councils of presidents of major Black organizations and institutions. And he's saying that they would be responsible for translating national proposals and programs of the National Council, everyday social relations, activities, and institutional development on a grassroots level. So they would take that stuff, they would translate it on basically a local level, I think, or a state level. And then he lists local councils of major Black organizations and institutions. So I guess these things will be implemented on a local level. And then he has community of individual groups, organizations, and institutions. So now these things will be implemented community level or individual and group level. Add to anything that Baba Amos proposed in his national political economic system for African American people? Like, do you think that this is a system that is viable? A system?
I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We don't have any of that.
Yeah, I think that is definitely viable. I think that is definitely a viable proposal as to how we should operate. You know, and another thing, as you know, Baba is charging us to upgrade our way of thinking. We so think at the local level. Oh, I want to get this group, I want to organize, you know, and that's where it does start. But we need to be thinking nationally, you know. And so when I looked at this chart, you know, I was thinking to myself, wow, you know, I understand the community activism, and while that's all well and good, all of these things need to be organized under a system, a national system, not just in Baltimore or just in my particular community and neighborhood, but it needs to be, you know, we need to organize and unite and implement things across the board on a national level. So this is what I saw when I was, you know, looking at this on table 2-3. But does anyone have anything else for page 50?
It just led me to think of what the brother was talking about. Well, I have an echo here. But it led me to think of when the brother was talking about, you know, people getting in positions of power, or he was saying he was a member of a group and it was cool until it was time to divvy up the positions and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I wonder, could we accomplish this? You know what I mean? Would egos get in the way? Like, who's going to be president? Who's going to be this? Who's going to be that? That's what our organization of Black people is that one of our biggest hindrances. How do we go about actually setting up this type of structure? Like, who nominates the people? You know what I mean? Who makes the decision? Who's the voting members? It's just like, I think it makes me think about the Black Power Awards. People are mad because they didn't get nomination. You know what I mean? Just on the smaller level. And that's just something minor. So I just think about something major and how would that actually work?
Yeah, that's true, Sister Alima. Like you said, that's what will get in the way. Egos and people wanting to, you know, be in a certain position. And we even see that in church, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we see that in church. You know, people are mad at the deacon or the pastor or you know. So yeah, I totally saying this. How can we accomplish these things? Have egos.
I'm sure Baba
so
will get into it eventually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So then Baba Wilson goes into discussing how to develop an African economic system. And he lists about 5 phases. He said phase 1 would be a broad base of retail and service outlets by individuals, partners, corporate groups, institutions, professionals, and lay organizations. And I think that we're already in phase 1. There are a lot of brothers and sisters who have retail and service outlets.
I agree.
Phase 2, and he said phase 2 would be the institution of wholesale and distribution centers to service the already established retail and service markets. So there are brothers and sisters I know that offer wholesale and distribution, but I don't think that we are established to the point where we can have distribution centers, you know, all over the place. So a part of me feels like we're still in phase 1. Phase 3, he says expansion of a manufacturing and raw material sector as the 3rd phase of economic development. So, you know, manufacturing and materials. So, you know, I think about that with Lima and how I hate going to this company. We get our videos pressed up by a company called NVIDIA. We had a brother and sister, and I'm not talking about a brother or sister who has a DVD tower that's burned. I'm talking about who has a company that can really burn DVDs and create the actual cases for me and print the paper so that we can keep the money within the community. So I totally understand the need for manufacturing, the raw materials for our goods and our services. The 4th phase, he says, involves the founding and expansion of financial services. All right. And that these financial service sectors will facilitate the purchasing of mainstream corporations and businesses, real estate, and other investment properties in a larger national economy. And then he ends with the fifth phase, which involves the entering into import and export trade relations across the African diaspora as part of the global Pan-African economic system and with other nations selling both goods and services. So he's saying on the 5th level, now we're importing and exporting these goods and services. Does anyone want to add to his development plan for an African American economic system, or can we move on?
We can move on. I'm good.
Yeah. All right. So the last section, is entitled "The Black American Nation Within a Nation." Now, Sister Alima, remember last week, I think it was Brother Travis. Remember he asked the question, or he posed the question like, well, how can we operate, you know, as a nation within a nation? Or he wanted us to kind of build on that. And you said,
right.
Oh, brother.
Right.
You said, oh, brother. You said, we're going to talk about that next week because you were already reading chapter 2. So you already knew what was coming up.
Right.
Yeah, so brother Baba Wilson has an entire section devoted to how to operate as a nation within a nation. And he's saying that it's possible. Underneath that section, the first paragraph, I'm reading the 2nd sentence. It says, to the degree, it says a social group can approach nation state status on an informal, non-declared level. It can create, accumulate, and maximally utilize its collective resources as media of its social power and will. The failure of the African American community to exercise considerable economic and political power despite its large population and broad national expense, as well as ample human and material resources, is directly linked to its failure to conceive of itself as a nation within a larger white American dominated nation itself as such. So basically a hindrance is the one of our I guess pitfalls or hindrance is that we don't even conceive of ourselves as a nation within a nation. We want to be a part of everybody of this system.
Right. Yeah,
instead of conceiving or thinking of ourselves as a nation. We don't. We think, when we think of nation, American people, when you say nation, they're thinking of America. That's the nation. They're thinking of themselves.
I was saying that's where that individualism comes from. We're a part of the broader, the larger group of people that, you know, basically, I forgot the word I'm looking for. I'm sorry. That we're subordinate to. They, you know,
Absolutely.
They view themselves through their oppressor's eyes.
Indeed.
Absolutely. And so we we don't think of ourselves as a nation, so we don't operate as one. And you know, go ahead, Brother T. I think you were getting ready to add. Brother T.
He disappeared again.
No, I was repeating what you were saying, sister.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. What were you saying? I didn't.
No, basically, when you was reading, I was agreeing with exactly what you were saying.
Okay, yeah. So we don't even operate. We don't operate as a nation because we don't think of ourselves as one. And so Dr. Amos Wilson saying that is a hindrance. That is a hindrance. And so moving on to page 52, I have this highlighted. That's furthermore, in the absence of a guiding national consensus regarding the overall goals and a shared sense of national mission, a set of regulatory principles, an African-centered consciousness and identity, a socialization system and system of governing institutions, the African community not only faces further subordination and exploitation, but possible fatal disintegration and annihilation. So he's saying, look, if we don't begin to think of ourselves as a nation and develop some sort of national and regulatory principles, it goes into our consciousness, our identity, and building these different governing systems, he's saying that we're going to die. We're going to be exterminated. We're no longer, like right now, we're talking about being, you know, dominated and exploited. But Baba Wilson or Baba Amos is saying that this is going to eventually lead to our fatal annihilation if we don't begin to function as a nation.
Yep.
As a nation. So he's saying we're going to die. That's what it says in this paragraph. If we don't change, you know, our mentality, we will be exterminated, not just
you think about the
exploited and
time period
dominated.
when this book was written, that's basically what's been happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're saying, Sister Alima, what he hypothesized this, 22 years ago.
Right.
And it's happening today.
Exactly.
So then he goes on, and this is kind of like the end of the chapter. He's talking about Chancellor Williams' book, The Destruction of the Black Civilization, chapter 25. You got it, T? I got it too, T. I haven't really got into it. I read it I read excerpts, but he's going into chapter 25 of The Destruction of the Black Civilization. And he's saying that Chancellor Williams detailed an actual nationwide African-American, let me read it. He says that Chancellor Williams in chapter 25 of his classic book, The Destruction of the Black Civilization, lays out a detailed race-based plan for the organization of the African-American community and the benefits such organizations can bestow on it. And, you know, I thought about this, Sister Alima, because when people discuss the destruction of the Black civilization, we talk about Africa and we focus on Africa, but no one ever talks about the fact that Chancellor Williams, after he talked about the destruction of the Black civilization, he provided us with a plan that we, you know, a plan that we can utilize to reconstruct and construct, you know, viable communities, right?
That's right.
But no one talks about that. It's like when we read the book, people focus on the history, and that's good. It's a lot of, you know, great historical information. But Chancellor William also gave us a plan that we could execute in order to rebirth or revitalize, you know, the African American community and the African community at large. So he details Chancellor Williams' master plan on pages 52 and 53. I'll let you guys read that at your leisure. I'll let you guys read that at your leisure. And then on page 54, he talks about another master plan that Chancellor Williams proposed. And he says that the structural organization Chancellor Williams suggests includes the following divisions: economic planning and development, political action, public education, community services, youth activities, African affairs, intelligence and security, and the Commission for Spiritual Assistance. So Chancellor Williams is saying, hey, like if you guys want to build a system, these are the divisions that you need to include: economics, education, community service, intelligence and security, right? And spiritual, the Commission for Spiritual Assistance, or a spirituality system, a spiritual system. Does anyone want to add anything to his suggestions? Something that we may be missing? Does anyone want to add?
I can't think of nothing, Queen.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on to the last page, I have this paragraph highlighted. He said, we must again emphasize that member organizations should be unequivocally Afrocentric in composition, structure, and purpose. They should avoid the like plague of the significant influence in or the leadership of their organization by persons tied to the Democratic or Republican parties, Marxist groups, overzealous religious groups, Eurocentric socialists, and assimilationists. The inclusion of such groups because of their ambivalent loyalty and conflict in priorities and values surely will be the death knell of organizations committed to the advancement of African people. So he's saying that, look, you know, when we organize and we have these organizations, or we built these structures and organizations, that the members of these organizations should be African-centered people. It should be Afrocentric in composition. He says structure and purpose. Otherwise, we'll have organizations, or we'll have a system of people who have ambivalent loyalties because they're not African-centered. So their loyalties will always be questionable because they're not African-centered people.
Totally agree with you, Dr. Maat.
Yeah, and they could always be bought, and they will sell us out, you know, for their own personal trinket.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Maat, that's what I was totally agreeing with, is that.
Are no allies.
Go ahead, Brother Travis.
Okay, now what happened is that I was thinking about, when I was reading this paragraph, I was thinking about Oprah Winfrey. I was thinking about Michael Jordan. I was thinking about people who have large sums of resources, but they don't have, I used to work, I'm an IT professional. I used to work for a black IT company. You wouldn't know the company was black because he hired all white, you know, people in positions of power. You know, he had a white wife. You know, and he lived in a white neighborhood. So I have a problem when people say we should support black business. We should support conscious black businesses.
Exactly.
If you're not invested in your resources in black communities, and you are alienated from black people, what benefit are you in the struggle?
None.
Absolutely.
That's benefit white supremacy.
Yeah, you're a proponent of the enemy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree with that more, Brother Travis.
Yes, good point.
Like you said, conscious black businesses.
Right.
Not just black businesses, conscious black businesses.
That's right.
Conscious black businesses. And then lastly, he says, I have this underlined as well on page 55, the working goals of a national system of divisions as proposed by Chancellor Williams, or of more specialized organizations of the types we just discussed, should be fortified and supported by an open-minded, creative, and productive Afrocentric policy formation and planning network. So he's saying that these divisions that they talked about, These divisions, this economic planning and development, political action, public education, community services, youth activities, African affairs, intelligence, security, and the Commission for Spiritual Assistance. He's saying that they should be fortified. So we're talking about strengthened and supported, right, by open-minded, creative, and productive Afrocentric policy formation and planning network. So that just reinforces what he said in the paragraph above, that the members of the organization should be Afrocentric. Okay, and not only be Afrocentric, but implement an Afrocentric policy formation and planning network. And maybe next time we can get into what does it mean to be Afrocentric. I recommend the book Afrocentricity by Dr. Malife Asante. What does it mean to be Afrocentric? People don't know, Sister Alima, what it means to be Afrocentric or to be African-centered. And so if you want to, study that and learn about Afrocentricity, please purchase the book by Dr. Malife Asante called Afrocentricity. So that's all I have. Next week, we'll be discussing chapter 3, social and cultural origins of power. And that's going to be a deep chapter. I'm looking at some of the sections right now: culture and power, the family as a power system, Black American culture and identity, culture, social and personal identity. What is that? The need, he said, the need for a new African self-identity. So it seems like Baba Amos is going to go in on this chapter. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion next week. It's 28 pages. Yeah. So do you guys have anything else?
No. It was wonderful building. Thank you, Queen.
This was
an honor to be here.
Yeah, and Sister Camille, look, Sister Alima and I, we were saying, we got to keep it at 1 hour, but it's so much information to cover that it's hard to condense all of this information in 1 hour. Like to me, it's impossible. I mean, I'm telling you, Sister Alima and I, when we begin these hangouts, we begin them with the intention to finish in 1 hour. But, when you get into the dialogue and you're sharing, ideas, it just drags on. So, we do apologize for the lengthiness, but at the same token, I mean, we're covering some powerful information.
And not to mention, we're not just reading this book, we're studying this book. We're trying to implement these things. So
a lot of study.
It's gonna take studying takes time. Sorry, people. It takes time.
Yeah, exactly. it's gonna be longer than an hour unless you split the chapters in half.
Exactly, and then it's gonna take us even longer to read the book.
Yeah, and so like some of these chapters are like
30, 40
like
pages.
The third chapter is 30 pages.
Exactly.
Yeah. But we're going to get through. I'm actually excited that I'm even in the book. You know what I mean? Because this book has been sitting in my possession probably for the last year or so. And I cracked it here and there, but to actually comb through it, by the time we meet next week, we'll be on page 85, 84, so we're getting through. We're definitely getting through the book.
You benefit from group study also, with that, collective consciousness. Because I read this book about 3 or 4 times over the years.
Wow.
Just being part of different organizations, again, like the organizational thing. So if you've seen one, you've seen them all, and these things are required reading. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of us got them like bookends to be like, hey, I got this book, I got that book. You see what I'm saying? But to really get into it and study, so much value is coming from this group, from the minds that are here. You see what I'm saying? So it increases your willingness to want to go read the chapter, and I've been a part of different, we could call this like a resurgence of the African mind mastermind group. You see what I'm saying? It's definitely a lot of jewels and knowledge that is coming out and wisdom coming out of this group. So I'm definitely glad to be a part, and I'm committed to see it to the end. So, for the family,
let's do it.
The family that's out there, hopefully they don't come in and think like, okay, I could start on chapter 18 or something like that. You see what I'm saying?
Right, and we appreciate your presence. You know, Brother Knowledge Born, we appreciate your presence. And Sister Alima and I, we'll tell you, we're fully committed to this. 31 weeks, 31 hangouts. We're fully committed to, like you said, seeing this thing through. I thank you, Sister Camille, you know, for being here. I appreciate your presence, sis. Brother T, as always, you know, I appreciate you coming through. I know you meant to come last week. You were on a roll. And yeah, he contacted me like the next day and he was like, sis, I got to catch up. You know, I was on the road and you said that you were making an effort to be here tonight, and you were. So I thank you for your presence. Brother Travis, I love you. I'm so happy that you joined. I love talking to you, brother, and hearing your perspective. And so I appreciate your presence and I appreciate your input, brother. I know that in the chat room, we had some people that joined us. I'm looking at Brother
Same
Chief
here.
X.
Love everybody here.
Love you too, bro.
Love you too, brother. I see that we had Brother Chief X. He came through, and Brother Ali Dawa L. I know that brother just got a copy of Blueprint for Black Power. We had the Global African Tribalism for Self-Government. That brother joined us, Raquel Ali. That sister joined us. My cousin Shawnee, her name is Shawnee, but in the chat room it says Letitia AM 100. She joined us. The sis, thank you, sister, for joining us. Dela Briggs, thank you so much, sister, for joining us. So we appreciate everyone who tuned in. Please join us next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to discuss Chapter 3 of Blueprint for Black Power. I have nothing left to say but peace and power, family. Have a prosperous and safe week.